Welcome into Triple Zeros, the anti-hot take sports show. I'm your host, Josh Buckhalter. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Josh G. Buck. Hit up the Facebook page, Clocker Sports. Website is clockersports.com, and the email address is clockersports@gmail.com. And of course, you can follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at 30 Pod. That's the number 30 Pod. The Chicago Bulls kicked off their regular season on Wednesday night. And listen, I got to tell you, you know how I get around this time, man. I get excited. And instead of just talking about it myself, because I'm going to be completely biased, I brought somebody else to help me be biased. And that is a very special guest today. NBC Sports Chicago's Rob Schaefer. That is Rob_Schaefer on Twitter. That's Rob_SCHAEF. And before we get any further than that, I want to say, Rob, thank you. You might not know this, but I've had quite a few NBC Sports Chicago guys on, and every time I do, I seem to fumble with their Twitter handle because it's got some kind of like a curveball. I last had Ryan Taylor on, and he had the oh God, I want to say it's an S, but it might be a 5, and that was my problem. So thank you for having a simple handle that I could follow.
Yeah, I try to keep it. I try to keep it simple. I guess when I made my Twitter account, I was in high school. I didn't know that that it was gonna come in handy later that I would have a simple handle. But that's a happy coincidence.
Yeah, it's been I talking about, I think Alex Shapiro got me with his, so I've been gotten a
Yeah.
few times by the guy. So you can read Rob on NBC Sports Chicago, and you can also hear him on the Bulls Talk podcast. And like I said, the Bulls kicked off the regular season with a 116-108 victory over the Miami Heat on the road, and they got I want to say vintage, right? But it was just last year, so I don't know how vintage it is, but performance from DeMar DeRozan. Rob, what were your takeaways from that game?
A lot of takeaways. A lot of them positive. Uh, DeMar was obviously the big one. 37 points is the most scored by a Bull in a season debut not named Michael Jordan. Anytime you're doing things that only Michael Jordan has done, that's pretty impressive. And like you said, Josh, like vintage, whatever the word is, he hasn't missed a beat from last season, right? 14 to 22 from the field, 8 of 14 from mid range, 2 of 3 from three, even sprinkled a couple of those in at timely moments. Was getting and ones on the floaters and the turnaround jumpers. And actually, what was encouraging about DeMar's usage to me too was certainly they leaned on him in isolation scenarios when he got rolling. When he came in after his rest at the beginning of the fourth quarter, he hit a couple shots to kind of quell a little Miami comeback push, but it didn't seem like as stagnant or as predictable offensively from a team wide perspective as it did down the stretch of last season. They had 5 guys in double figures. They shot reasonably well from 3, better than I probably expected them to, and better than they started the game. They start over 6, they end 36%, and actually made more threes than the Heat and Miami. Whatever their ranks are, they've got a bunch of guys that can get hot from behind the line. Hero, Robinson, Strus, Lowry didn't look so good yesterday, but he certainly has that reputation. So that was a positive takeaway. I think the Goran Dragic and Andre Drummond additions, I certainly thought they were solid pickups at the time, but seeing in action how they affect that second unit and how much confidence Billy Donovan now has in that second unit, where he wasn't even staggering DeRozan or Nikola Vucevic with the bench guys, which was, you would never see that last year. There was always one of the Bulls' star scorers staggered with some of the reserves. I think the fact that he had enough trust and confidence in guys like Dragic, Kobe White, Drummond, Javante coming off the bench. Caruso started for Zach, but he'll typically be coming off the bench, when Zach plays. That could be a big improvement for this Bulls team. And having 2 guys deeper of depth is going to help with no Lonzo, obviously, for the foreseeable future, and as they manage Zach's knee. So Dragic, 12 points, 4 threes. Drummond, 9 and 5. Kobe didn't shoot the ball well, but hit a couple timely shots. Loved what I saw from them. They blew their bench points scoring average from last season, which is near the bottom of the league, out of the water. 37 points off the bench. So that was those are 2 big takeaways. And then the last one I'd say is the Bulls. I mean, it's hard to call the first game of the season a statement win, especially because of how many wacky kind of all over the place results there were in the NBA last night as we're recording this. But I don't think the Bulls beat a team that good all year last year. I mean, when you look at their record against the top 4 teams in each conference, they were 0-4 against Miami, and they really got blown out in the 2 games in Miami last year. So a road win against a team of that caliber, they lose PJ Tucker. They looked a little sluggish. That's still a team that's going to be, in the thick of it, deep into the postseason, or at least you have to, say that that's their body of work. So I think it's an impressive win in that respect. And really, it felt close because of the caliber of team Miami is, and because the Bulls have let a couple of those games slip in recent years. But Miami never really got within 8 points in the last 5 minutes. I thought the Bulls' execution on both ends was great down the stretch. They forced 9 Miami turnovers in the fourth quarter. So I think just, not only to start a season that had so many negative headlines with Lonzo and Zach coming into the year, starting off a season like that with a win is certainly important, but to do it against that type of opponent that has had your number so often in the past, I think makes it even more significant.
We'll get to Lonzo and Zach in a second, but you kind of hinted at it there with the it started off rough, right? And then they kind of got themselves together. It was tied up at halftime. DeRozan hadn't even done anything yet. And then they came out and they kind of took care of business. What does that say about really Billy Donovan's ability to kind of make adjustments, something that we were kind of harping on him for last season?
Yeah, I think they adjusted well in this game. I think DeMar found his way into the game. He was getting doubled a lot early and certainly found his spots to pick as the game went along. He only had 9 points in the first half and then obviously has 28 in the second half. Certainly give Billy and the coaching staff credit for schematic adjustments. But one thing I would say about them too, I can't speak to what Miami's training regimen is coming into a season. They're obviously a very serious-minded team, heat culture, yada, yada. But the Bulls definitely looked, as the game wore on, like the sharper, better conditioned, and more focused team in that game. I think that, says a lot about why they were able to win it. And, I know over the, since the end of the preseason, the Bulls have practiced very rigorously, very arduously. Billy has been really hammering all these new offensive points of emphasis, share the ball, move, run, help each other defensively. And he really put them through the ringer over the weekend coming into the opener, I think knowing that they were going to need to be the sharper, more focused and better conditioned team against such a high quality opponent. So I give him credit for all of those things. And frankly, that resilience, that ability to take Miami's first punch where they were up 13-4 in the first few minutes of the game, heroes going crazy. Like that's a game that for last season's Bulls, especially the second half of the season after the injuries took hold. I mean, that could have easily gotten away from them, right? It's a 15, 20-point game at half, and that's kind of all she wrote. But that wasn't the case last night. I give the coaching staff a lot of credit for that. And honestly, I give the second unit a lot of credit because they kind of went with that reserve heavy lineup. I think they were down 3 late in the first quarter, and they basically held the deficit at that until DeRozan, Vucevic, kind of the heavy hitters were able to come back. And then you saw them tie it up before the half and then obviously make their big run in the third quarter. So top to bottom, the way that they shot the ball, the way that they defended, there were some lapses on that end, but late in the game, I think they got the stops they needed to. And then the resilience they showed, I was just all around an impressive win.
It truly was. And you talked about, kind of everybody coming together and it's positive. That's a great thing. But there is that injury concern because I heard your colleague Casey Johnson talk about, even he was surprised to hear that Zach was going to be a scratch for that game. And then he's going to be out for Friday's contest as well. Hearing Billy talk about, this is part of the plan. And then he started talking about soreness. And then I got flashback. I got PTSD from Lonzo. Is there any kind of concerns that we're not the same? Because I know Lonzo's like an extreme case, but like any concerns that this is going to be a hindrance for Zach this year?
I'm concerned because, being around camp, being around the preseason games, obviously they were managing Zach's minutes carefully in the preseason, which made sense. His offseason, he had the surgery back in May. And most of his offseason was rehab, and he wasn't really able to do the kind of 5-on-5 training workouts, whatever you want to call them, that he typically would do in an offseason to ramp up for the season. So it made sense to manage him carefully in the preseason. That said, all through camp, after practices, talking to people from Billy to Zach to, people, with the team, the consensus seemed to be that Zach had his, I think Bill, to use a direct quote from Billy, he had his athleticism, his bounce, and his pop back. Zach said multiple times that he felt great physically, that he was playing with no limitations, that he was relieved to be feeling better than he was down the stretch last season when he had that knee soreness that he then addressed with surgery. So what's concerning is something obviously changed between the end of last week, which is the last time Zach talked to reporters and reported feeling good, and Tuesday when he's marked as questionable on the injury report. And then obviously Wednesday he's rolled out. He was just rolled out today for Friday's game against the Wizards. Back-to-backs are obviously going to be something. He'll be playing at most one of the 2 back-to-back games for at least the early part of the season. But what's concerning is something obviously changed in that stretch of time. And Zach, I'm not in Miami, but I've read his comments that he made to reporters after shoot around on Wednesday. And he kind of downplayed the idea that there was a setback or there was a flare-up. But then, Billy kind of in contradictory fashion came out in his pregame availability and said, no, listen, like we had a couple hard practices after the preseason finale, which Zach skipped, and he had some soreness, and that kind of led to this, ruling him out on Wednesday and Friday. What I really don't believe, which Billy said, was that the team was expecting something like this. Back-to-backs, I think, are reasonable. Yeah, we're going to manage it. Abundance of caution. Missing the season opener and feeling that soreness and being in a place where the Bulls are going to have to manage him as closely as it seems like they're going to. I don't believe for a second that the team thought that was coming, because every report since the surgery, throughout the offseason, throughout camp and the preseason, has been nothing but positive. This is in the rear view. This isn't going to be a story anymore. And now it is. So, I think the hope has to be that this is something that affects him maybe for the early part of the season, and it's just a ramification of the surgery. And once he's able to ramp himself all the way back up, it goes away, and, he's able to proceed as normal. As it stands right now, my concern is that this sounds a lot like the ailment that he was dealing with last year before the surgery. And if that's what it's going to be like all year for the Bulls, I mean, I know Zach still produced at a pretty high level down the stretch of last year when you look at the statistics, but he was not the same player, particularly defensively. And if this team wants to reach its ceiling, which, last night is a great first step to doing that without Zach and Lonzo, you're starting backcourt, you go out and beat the former, the last year's number one seed in the East. That's a great start. But when you take the long view of a full 82-game season in the playoffs, if you don't have Zach LaVine at 100%, this team isn't reaching its ceiling. So for that reason, I'm concerned. Not going to, say anything definitive after one game, but I think Bulls fans should be watching this very, very, very closely over the next few weeks and then throughout the season to see how Zach feels. Is he able to get better, or is this just something that's going to be a reality for him?
Yeah, I think my first hint was when they announced the opener absence. I was like, okay, that's odd because we've had nothing. There's nothing going on. Like, you should be ready. But then immediately right after, they said, oh, he's also going to be on Friday. It's like, oh, this is a problem. So that's where my concern level came in. Speaking of concern level, Patrick Williams looked a lot. Also, speaking of looking like last year, he looked like himself from last year. I'm sure they're going to have a lot more patience than one game with him. But how troubling was it to see after all the talk, all the hype, how much their improvement this season relies upon him? How disappointing was it to see him come out 6 shots in damn near 30 minutes?
Listen, of course, you got to give more than one game, but it absolutely was disappointing. And even beyond the 4 points and 6 shots, 2 rebounds in 28 minutes from your starting power forward. And defensively, he had a nice play on Jimmy in the first quarter, I think it was. You didn't necessarily feel him inserting himself into the game on that end. These subtle elements that Billy wants him to channel his aggression in. Billy doesn't think of it as raw shot attempts or points or for Pat in terms of being aggressive. He thinks of it as screen setting, rebounding, getting out in transition, disrupting defensively. Even beyond the 4 points on 6 shots, I watching on TV, you didn't feel him in the game, even in those respects. So I think that's disappointing. He was on track to close the game, and then he committed a turnover with just over 2 minutes left, and it felt like Billy kind of pulled him for Dragic there. And the game wasn't necessarily in jeopardy at that point, but that felt like a conscious decision by Billy there. So, Javonte outperformed him in the preseason. The Bulls started him anyway. I think knowing, how important he is to the team this season and how important, getting as much opportunity as possible is for his development. That said, it wasn't a good start. I think it was one of the few negatives, along with Zach's injury status. I think that was one of the few negatives from this game. And you really want to see him kind of bounce back against the team in Washington, who, they're no pushovers, but that's not quite a caliber of team as a Miami or even as a Cleveland on Saturday for the home opener. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Patrick does. But I really would implore people to, the shot attempts and the points and how aggressive he is with the ball, that matters, but he can still have a positive impact by being on the glass and running the break and being a solid screen setter. So those are the areas that I'm looking at primarily for him. I think Nikola Vucevic is a great example of this. Now, obviously, they're two completely different players, and Vuce is a vet. Vuce comes out, he's getting switches, he's getting guards switched onto him. Teammates aren't able to get him the ball. He misses a few bunnies, misses his first 4 3-point attempts. He's not shooting the ball well. Pulled down 17 rebounds, blocked 3 shots, and won the center matchup with Bam. And then obviously he comes up and hits, one of the biggest shots of the game. that three to put him up 9 with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So that's the mentality I think you would want to see from Pat. Okay, the flow of the offense isn't, directing you to score. Your shot's not falling. Find other ways to impact the game. He didn't do that in the opener. The Bulls really, really need him to do that moving forward. And we'll see if he's able to do it. Again, like you said, patience for a 21-year-old and a third-year guy. But at the same time, these Bulls have high expectations. They can't sit around and wait forever for him.
Yeah, I noted during media day, I think it was, where Billy kind of flatly said that they need him to take a next step. That was a shift in the way Billy's usually talked about Pat. It's usually kind of like, yeah, it'd be nice, but we're just waiting on him. He was kind of like, yeah, no, we need it. So I felt like that was a shift in how he looked at it. And then what made the night so disappointing to me, again, like you said, there's other ways he can impact the game, but knowing that Zach wasn't going to be there, we've always had this belief that, okay, well, he just can't match with all three of the stars. Well, they could have used a third guy last night and it wasn't there. And that to me was disheartening.
Unless they were staggering him with the second unit too. And you're right. It just wasn't there. So, chalk it up to the first game of the season. If it continues, the concern grows more and more every game, but let's see what he does.
Now, you talked about Kobe White not getting his shot. He kind of did what you were talking about with Vucevic, where the shot wasn't falling, but he found other ways to make an impact on the game. One guy, a young guy, who start to finish just kind of showed himself and was announced his presence was Ayo Dosunmu. How impressive was it to see not only him kind of command the floor, because remember there was that moment he pulled Drummond to the side. He just kind of had a more calmer presence than he'd had last year, but really just his overall game. Like, it was a really impressive debut as the starting point guard from day one, in my opinion.
Listen, Ayo is fantastic, but it's not surprising, right? Is anybody surprised to see him put up 17, 6 boards, 4 assists, couple steals? Like, every hurdle, obstacle, challenge in his path since he's gotten to the Bulls, to the point that, he was at the end of the bench. He's out of the rotation this time last year. And look at him now. So some things I liked about Ayo's game. I thought he was, I thought his decision-making was pretty sound, only 2 turnovers in 36 minutes. Kind of seemed to have the gauge. This stuff kind of goes beyond the numbers, but seemed to have the gauge of when to push, when to pull out, and kind of let a possession breathe. I think those are good strides for him as a young point guard and somebody who's really being asked to take on a lot of responsibility in terms of bringing the ball up, getting the Bulls into sets, making plays for himself and his teammates. And then his shot making. I mean, 7 of 14, 3 of 6 from 3. He's talked about that he tried to speed up that shot release over the course of his summer, because he shot the ball pretty well last year, but he didn't really do it on volume. And you saw in the playoffs, he's not a guy that commands a ton of defensive attention when he's spotting up. But, if he can shoot, he's not going to shoot 3 of 6 from 3 every night, but if he can sprinkle those in and bump up his, maintain similar mid to high 30s percentage, that's going to be a weapon for him. And it makes him multifaceted because obviously we know what he is with the ball in his hands. He can slash, great attacking closeouts, great cutting, pretty advanced finisher for his experience level. But being able to play off of the Bulls' primary offensive options, DeMar, Zach, Vooch, by being a threatening spot up shooter, especially, this team needs to bump its 3-point volume this year, that could be a big weapon for him too. So all around, I was very impressed with Ayo, wasn't necessarily surprised. And I just expect more of the same in that respect from him. I don't think he'll average 17, 6, and 4 this year, but everything,
that'd be impressive.
But all the subtleties, the solid decision making, not playing outside of himself, and keeping things organized. I think he was really impressive, and I would expect those things to continue. And then you have, the interpersonal stuff, that Drummond thing. That's just a perfect snapshot of what coaches and what Ayo and what his teammates have talked about all offseason, which is that he came in as a rookie and came with respect, came inquisitive, and won a lot of his teammates' favor very, very quickly. And now in this second season, not that he wasn't vocal before, but he's even taking on more of a vocal presence, just knowing how important he is to the team's success. I thought that was a really cool anecdotal thing to see that Drummond moment. And you kind of feel the respect that he has, nurtured throughout the team, just in the way he plays and the way his teammates respond to him.
You touched on it earlier. The Dragic and the Drummond signing, both were kind of met with side eyes when it first happened. It's one game, but they've looked good in the preseason as well. Do you think that there's a chance that they turn from being, like, I don't want to say laughing stock, right, but like taken lightly, to being like some of the best additions of the offseason?
Yeah, well, they're the only additions to the offseason, right?
Well, not just for the Bulls, but like in general.
Sure. Yeah. No, I see it. And what I think stood out last night is, and I mentioned it earlier, Billy not being afraid to ride with bench only units because you have a veteran shot creator in Dragic. I mean, he's not going to go 4 or 5 from 3 every night, but he's a pretty reliable shooter. He's a crafty playmaker. Drummond, he had pop in the preseason, showed it again, made all his free throws, pulled down some rebounds, got out on the break, had a dunk. I mean, we knew that the backup center spot was going to be a huge upgrade with Drummond over guys like Tony Bradley, Derek Jones, Alize Johnson, the hodgepodge of names the Bulls had there last year. And Dragic, he was talked a lot about as an insurance policy for Lonzo Ball. Screw it, man. If this is what Zach's, at least the early part of Zach's season is going to look like, I mean, he's an insurance policy for Zach LaVine too, in the sense that you can slide Caruso up to the starting lineup. You can fudge with the rotations a little bit, but you have a steady presence to command offense on the second unit and get that group playing in what I think is a pretty good way of playing. They play fast, they share the ball. That group looked good in the preseason, and they passed their first regular season test as well. So, I think on paper they were marginal additions, right? Which the front office itself said that they were just going to make marginal moves this offseason. So I think that's why they kind of get shrugged off a little bit. But then when the games start and you realize, oh man, even with their starting backcourt out, this Bulls team goes 9 players deep. That's how deep this rotation goes. I think it allows them to weather some adversity in terms of injuries that they might potentially run into this year, guys playing inconsistently. They're just a deeper team than they were last year. And it might have gotten underrated, but people should know now that building that depth, not only having it, but also having it with veteran guys who are consistent, what to expect from them every night, that could absolutely be a valuable thing for the Bulls throughout the regular season, and then they hope the playoffs.
Yeah, I was a fan of them before, but seeing them in the preseason, then seeing it, when it actually counted, because in the preseason you're always like, it's preseason, they're not even really trying out there. But last night, Dragic came in and was immediately effective. Drummond's energy shows, his intensity shows, his toughness showed. So I definitely like both additions. We're going to wrap up with some narratives. I want you to try to dispel or support whichever one you choose that have been kind of popular for the Bulls this offseason, and that are going to linger, I'm sure, until we get to the postseason, because they just don't trust the Bulls at anything. So we're going to start off with a popular one. The Bulls will regret not trading Patrick Williams.
Will regret not trading Patrick Williams. Do I agree or disagree with that?
It's intentionally.
Am I allowed to cop out?
You get whatever answer comes to you.
Here's my problem with the premise of it is I truthfully don't know what they could have gotten for Patrick Williams. Say they decided to trade him. Now the easy answer is Jeremy Grant or stuff like that. So without really having a trade offer that was feasible in front of me, it's hard to really go one way or the other on that. Plus you factor in his age and where he's at in his development. I will say, I don't want to say I'm down on Pat at this point, but I am a little skeptical watching the way his development track has gone. Obviously giving him every opportunity because of the injury he went through last year and being as young as he is. But I'm a little skeptical that he puts it together in the way that I know some fans want, to be a, star level player. I've always kind of thought his ceiling was kind of like a Swiss Army knife 3-and-D guy who can kind of do a little bit of everything, but isn't like an all-star level guy overall. So we'll see. I guess I'll say no, just without knowing what trade offer necessarily would have been out there for him.
That's totally fair. Completely fair. Next one, the Bulls and DeMar DeRozan. So you can answer these together or separately, but they are due to take a step back this season.
Well, I predicted them, just be transparent. I predicted them for 43 wins and the 8 seed. So by the numbers, if that prediction were to come true, it would be a step back in terms of the win-loss record and in terms of the seeding. So I'm more talking about the Bulls with that. So I'll separate that from DeMar. I just think with Lonzo being sidelined indefinitely now with the Zach thing, with how tough the East is, I'm not taking anything away from the win that they had yesterday. It was incredibly impressive. I just think over the course of a season, I don't see them matching their win total from last year or exceeding it unless some things drastically change health-wise, which they very well could. The one caveat, we talked about this, and Will Perdue and I talked about this on our podcast today. One caveat I'd throw in there, if the health improves over the course of the season, you could see the Bulls be 3 or 4 regular season wins worse than they were last season, but be better equipped for the playoffs. That is possible. But then the caveat to that caveat is, well, shoot, if they're in the play-in, nothing's promised, and you're not going to have a favorable first-round matchup. Obviously, they didn't last year, but it could be even worse this year. So I will agree that they're due to take a step back this year in terms of the win-loss record and the seeding and things like that. As far as DeMar goes, no, I don't think so. Now could this? Now he had a career high scoring average last year, 27.9 points a game. Could he average less points than that? Sure, absolutely. But I think in the end, that actually could end up being better for the Bulls if there is a more even distribution. We'll see what happens with Zach here. But no, in terms of his efficiency, in terms of him getting to his spots, in terms of him being one of the better closers, fourth quarter players in the league, shot creators, I mean, his game is just going to age so gracefully. I'm not going to predict a decline for DeMar DeRozan until I see it individually. So I'll separate those two things. I'll agree with that the Bulls could take a step back this year. DeMar, even if it's 26 points a game this year, I still think efficiency-wise, I still think in terms of stepping up in the biggest moments, I don't see him falling off from what he showed last year.
I think my favorite part about DeMar is we always talk about negatively about athletes having rabbit ears, right? Hearing everything. DeMar hears everything and then literally turns it into fuel to go out and murder people on the floor. It's great. It's great stuff. So
that's what the great ones do.
And then last one, we'll get you out here on this one. The Bulls went all in on this core too soon.
Let's see how the season plays out. That one I think I could end up agreeing with, only because again, I predict this season to end in the play-in tournament and in the low to mid 40s in wins. To me, it would be a very uphill battle to win a playoff round coming from that spot. Not saying that that's for sure going to happen. That's just my prediction. If that were to happen, and then you face the free agent decisions that you have this offseason, you got Kobe coming up, you got Pat eligible for an extension, you got Ayo a free agent, Javante's a free agent, Vooch, crucially, is a free agent. That 2-year run for this core with the amount that they invested in this group, all the future draft picks coming right up to the luxury tax line and clearly not wanting to go over it. If the result of all of that is 2 first-round playoff appearances, and you bow out both times, I don't think that would be successful. And I don't think the front office would view it as successful because they've stated that they want year-over-year improvement, and year-over-year improvement from last year would mean winning a playoff series. So I think you could argue that the thing is there's nuance to it, because I don't think that means that every move they made was bad. Mm-hmm. But I think the collection of them has produced a group that I just personally don't see as like an elite contender in the Eastern Conference. And yet when you look at their cap sheet, when you look at the future picks that they have invested, they've invested resources, similar resources that a lot of teams that are further along than them have, at least in my eyes. So I think I do agree with that one. That said, I mean, personally, I think the biggest thing that kind of set this domino effect off is the Vooch trade. Mm-hmm. Not to say anything negative about Vooch as a player, but I think it's pretty clear that trade was a massive overpay at the time. And, so it's a massive overpay looking back at it, I should say. And that kind of set off the chain of events that has led them to this point. But that's why they play the games, right? I mean, I had them pretty well pegged last year. I had them at 45, 46 wins in the 5 or 6 seed. They certainly flashed higher potential than that, and then the season cratered for a number of reasons. So I think the view that this management regime is taking is, let's see if we can get healthy, and let's see if we can build on that early season success last year. Just until that happens, I'm a little bit reserved in terms of making too many crazy optimistic predictions, given how tough the conference is.
It is a very expensive gamble by this front office. He is Rob Schaefer of NBC Sports Chicago. Follow him on Twitter at Rob_Schaefer. That's Rob_SCHAEF. Read his stuff on NBC Sports Chicago. And of course, listen to him on the Bulls Talk podcast. Rob, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Appreciate it.
That's going to do it for this episode of Triple Zeros. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Josh G. Buck. Hit up the Facebook page, Clocker Sports, website, clockersports.com. And the email address is clockersports@gmail.com. And of course, you can follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at 3zerospod. That's the number 3 zeros and pod. We're gone.